Welcome back to my basement. Today, we've got a little bit of a wild movie to talk about that maybe you've heard of, maybe you haven't. The movie in question is Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. And let me be the first to tell you, this is not your classic Disney adaptation. When I first heard about this film way back, maybe sometime last year, I was immediately on board. I did not need to see the trailer. I did not need to see any promotional photos, no movie poster, no directorial interviews, nothing. All I knew is that this was a new telling of a Winnie the Pooh story where Winnie the Pooh and Piglet go on a murderous rampage after being left alone by Christopher Robin. Christopher Robin, of course, goes off to college to be a doctor, and Pooh, Piglet, and their other friends embrace their, let's say, abnormalities while living out in the woods, and gain a propensity for blood, and death, and murder, and mutilation, and decapitation, and a little bit of cannibalism sprinkled on top there. So pretty much that's the entire plot. Christopher Robin comes back from college to show his fiancée the 100-acre wood where he used to hang out with Pooh, Piglet, and all of their other friends. They find Pooh and Piglet, or rather Pooh and Piglet find them, and the wife, I think her name is Mary, gets strangled by Piglet. Very, very good way to start out a movie if you ask me. Christopher Robin becomes a prisoner of Pooh and Piglet, held captive and tortured for leaving them. Not too far away in the 100-acre wood, there is a group of, I think, 6 vacationing women just trying to disconnect and get away from the busy world. Unfortunately for them, there is a bear and a pig roaming around the woods. Needless to say, none of them make it out alive. What I did really enjoy was that the main girl in the group of vacationing girls, the one that actually has a backstory, is modeled to be the final girl in the film, when in reality it's Christopher Robin who's the final girl. Obviously you don't really find that out until the end of the film. Not that it's a huge deal. I mean, you can have main characters of human nature, the girls, Christopher Robin, his wife, whatever. But the real stars of the show are Pooh and Piglet. To tell you the truth, about 90% of this movie is laughably absurd. But there is always a fine line between horror and comedy. And when you can walk that line straight down the middle, you've got something magical on your hands. Take, for example, the scene where one of the girls is in the hot tub. She's having a great time listening to music on her phone that she's not supposed to have, and Pooh and Piglet come up behind her, chloroform her, hog tie her, and put her in the driveway of the house. You'll think, easy kill, right? Smash her head with a hammer, slit her throat with the nearest butcher's knife, whatever. You're wrong. Winnie the Pooh gets behind the wheel of a car and drives straight over her skull. Eye popping out, skull crush, blood spurts, everything. How else is a sane viewer or a dedicated horror veteran gonna deal with that besides laughing? I can tell you, I was chuckling the whole way. Especially when Pooh was revving his engine and his ears were flapping, his mouth became a big smile. It was truly one of the funniest scenes in the movie, and I do not mean that lightly. One of the main points of Pooh and Piglet is that after Christopher Robin left 100-acre wood to go to college to become a doctor, Pooh, Piglet, and the other animals swore off talking. They swore off any connection to their human roots that they had, with the exception of walking on 2 legs, I guess, because they do that all the time. And maybe wearing clothes, because they do that as well. Although Pooh can't wear his red shirt, Piglet can't be in pink and purple clothes, because that's still under Disney's copyright, and that's a whole nother sticky situation with the public domain and what Disney owns, what they don't. We don't want to go there. Now, I'll come back to the not talking part in 1 second, but before I do, I just want to mention the blood and gore in this movie. I already touched on it previously with the girl getting her head run over, but for a low-budget film like this, I think they really dedicated most of it to the costumes of Pooh and Piglet and the blood and gore, because there was a lot. People were getting their faces smashed with sledgehammers, obviously getting their head run over by a car tire. They were getting stabbed. One girl, very nice Halloween reference, might I add, got held up by her neck against a tree with a machete stuck through her mouth, and that was hanging her against the tree. Very similar to how Michael Myers commits one of his murders in 1978's masterpiece, Halloween. So for that, Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, you get instant points from me. Now, to help me along in this conversation just a little bit, I want to toss it over to Christian to discuss the ending of this movie.
Okay, so my favorite part of Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey was definitely the part when you first hear Winnie speak to Christopher Robin at the end, and he says you left, and then he just slits the final girl's throat. Definitely an ending I was not expecting. Went away from the traditional final girl type of narrative you see in a lot of these horror type movies. But yeah, definitely enjoyable. You can't take it too serious, and definitely kind of scarred me on how I look at Winnie the Pooh and the rest of the characters of that story.
Now that you're all caught up on that, let's talk about how the movie fits as a horror film. As a slasher, I really thought this movie was pretty good. I mean, it knows the ins and outs of the genre, and it knows how to work with those elements. For example, at the very most bare bones description of a slasher, you have the other, typically the outcast of society that is there solely to hunt and dismantle those that represent the norms of that society. Then you have those people that the other is hunting. You have character archetypes like the final girl or the doomsayer, or just people in touch with that society in general. They are the norms. You have the other and the norms. In a slasher movie, they must collide. Really, in most horror movies, but we're talking slashers here. Think Michael Myers over here, Laurie Strode, Annie Brackett, all of her friends over here. You've all seen Halloween, or at least I hope you have, and you understand how they mesh. Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey is no different. You have Pooh and Piglet, who from the onset of the movie are distinctly named as abominations. They are, without actually saying it, the other. Over here, you have Christopher Robin, the guy who befriended the abominations, yet still left to go to college to become a doctor, to be a part of that society that outcasts these ones over here. You have the vacationing girls that are a part of society, trying to find their way into the woods, into the domain of the other. Obviously, there is no way that these two can mesh in a way that gives you a happy ending. So by that logic, yeah, Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey knows exactly what it's doing and how to do it to become a horror movie, even if we are taking a children's fairy tale type story and twisting it on its head. Now, the big part for me is that I know this film is low budget. I know it was a quick turnaround movie, and I know that it's kind of a novelty film, but I'm a big advocate for a good script. And while I think this one was fine as a slasher movie, because slasher movies typically don't need a heavy hand in story anyway, I think this film could have 100% benefited from maybe another 30 minutes or so of just general story exposition. Think of it this way. In the theatrical cut, the movie begins with a 2D animation explaining how a young Christopher Robin found his way into 100 Acre Wood, became friends with Pooh, Piglet, Eeyore, and any other of the characters that they could include without infringing on copyright, and how they became friends. Christopher Robin would bring them food. The animals would become dependent on him to bring food, and when he left to go to college, they starved during the winter. The only way to survive was to eat Eeyore. Now, that drove them a little nuts and made sure that they would disregard any human roots, any human connections that they might have, and simply become the animalistic murderers that you see in this film. That all accounts for maybe the first 2 minutes of the movie. And you see a few snippets of it here and there throughout the rest. My line of thought was that, one, it would be great to see the animals as younger versions of themselves, complete with practical effect costumes, maybe a touch-up of CGI here and there, but for the most part, Pooh and Piglet as adults, practical effects looked incredible. But also, if you spend more time with those characters at the beginning, it would be a bit more impactful for the viewer to finally see them having to murder and eat their friend Eeyore, or to see Christopher Robin leaving for college, or to just see that general shift in the animals from becoming friends of Christopher Robin to distinct enemies of Christopher Robin. Now, don't get me wrong, again, the 2D animation was great. The art style was fantastic and really fit the tone of the movie. But I think if we're just going for story quality and continuity, I really think that extra time with the live action characters as children would have hammered it home. In addition, I feel like it would make the ending a bit more powerful. Something that Christian mentioned earlier on was when you have the final stare down between Christopher Robin and Pooh. Pooh, an animal who has sworn off talking in any human roots, simply says, "You left," before slitting the throat of the last girl of the group. Already in the theatrical cut, that is a very powerful moment between the two characters, showing that Christopher Robin is the one that drove Pooh to commit these actions. And you could argue otherwise, but for the sake of this video, we're just going to keep it at that. Secondly, if you saw them as children talking and having a good time and speaking, and you saw the timeline of Pooh and Piglet beginning to devolve into these murderers. I think hearing him talk once more at the end would have been just a touch more significant for the viewer to see on the big screen. Maybe just some final thoughts here. I mentioned the blood and gore. I mentioned the costumes a little bit for Pooh and Piglet. I feel like I should say with them, they are fantastic. Please take that away from this review. They are fantastic costumes. They're mostly practical effects, and especially with Pooh, it looks like some of his mask elements are engineered so that they can move. So his smile becomes bigger, turns into a frown, or his ears wiggle. Things like that are especially funny in intense moments when he's maybe stalking his prey, or like I said, behind the wheel of a car. Piglet really just screams, and it's funny, but it's a little unsettling, truly. I mean, this film knows how to handle horror, it knows how to handle comedy, and it knows how to handle the both of them in tandem. So with that being said, Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey at its core is a good horror movie. But does this idea of public domain fairy tales, children's stories turned horror slashers have an expiration date? I mentioned earlier that Blood and Honey felt sort of like a novelty film. You know, you went into it expecting to have a good time, or at least hoping to have a good time, and I certainly did. Christian certainly did. My whole theater certainly did. How many times can this be made, or how many times can this be brought up before an audience finally says, yeah, okay, we got it? Are they gonna make a Snow White next? Mary Had a Little Lamb? Cinderella? James and the Giant Peach? Who knows? The possibilities are nearly endless. I genuinely think that the more they do it, the less interesting they're going to be, and possibly the lower in quality they're going to drop. But that's a bridge that we'll have to cross when we get there. I myself, huge horror freak, love all these kinds of things. I thought this movie was 100% fully enjoyable. No matter what walk of life you're coming from, no matter what experience you have with Winnie the Pooh or horror movies, I think that you can sit down and watch this hour and a half or so and have a great time no matter who you're with. If the writer-director of this film, Rhys Frake Waterfield, does decide to go forward with his idea of making a horror slasher universe for these children's bedtime stories, I'll be in the theater. I will sit there and watch these films. But I do think their novelty limit is something to watch out for. Don't overstay your welcome, but maybe keep making bloody horror movies. Thanks for watching. Hope to catch you guys in the next one.